have to say that the human brain is amazing, and not only that, human thinking is amazing. Now, I'll give you an example of the amazingness of human thinking, and that is we managed to put men on the moon and to bring them safely back to the planet Earth. I mean, that is truly amazing when you think about it. However, as we've just alluded to, there are problems which seem to persist that our human thinking is not having much success with, and these become the chronic problems, and there seems to be so many of them today. And when we try fixes for these chronic problems, what we finish up with is actually often worse, something's more malignant, and we have loads of unintended consequences. So I'm just wondering if there is a different type of thinking that needs to be applied to these sorts of issues. There is one big difference between getting a few men on the moon and bringing them back again and, say, solving poverty. And that big issue is simply that a number of people, and people are complex. So there will be millions or billions of people that are affected by these chronic situations that are occurring. And maybe that type of thinking that can get a man on the moon is not the right thinking to resolve those sorts of issues. So I want to take a few moments now to a brain perspective on this particular issue. And I'm going to look at and share with you some models of the brain to see whether they can give us some insights about whether the brain actually has different ways of thinking. I'm going to share with you 3 models, and you'll be aware of some of these probably, and you may not. The first model of the brain is called the triune model. And this was devised in the 60s by a neuroanatomist called Paul MacLean. And the triune brain basically takes a slice down the brain and identifies 3 anatomical regions: the lower brain, the middle brain, and the upper brain. Very, very simple model. Now, Paul MacLean called the lower brain our reptilian brain because it actually seemed to have features that were similar to reptiles. The middle brain, the limbic system, he called our mammalian brain. And then the upper brain is what he called our human brain. That's the cerebral cortex. And that is where he said resides our rationality and our creativity. Parts of the brain that we need to access to be truly human. Now, does that model offer anything about thinking? Well, one of the things is that it does, and Paul MacLean said this, is that when we're relaxed, we access the whole of the brain. But actually, when we're stressed or anxious, or our focus is particularly locked on one thing, he said the brain shifts down into this reptilian brain, which is an automatic brain. It sees the world as black and white, either or. It tends to see the world in abstractions. So this first model does suggest that there are 2 ways that we can think. One is a very focused way, when we tend to be stressed and anxious and agitated, and that is our reptilian brain, our lower brain. Or we can be relaxed, and we can access our rationality, our logic, and our creativity. That's model 1. That does suggest that there's more than one way of thinking, if you like, when we're looking to solve issues. The second model I'll call the left and the right side of the brain model. And this came out of the work of people like Roger Sperry, where they saw that the brain actually has 2 halves. So as most of you will know, you have a left half to your brain and a right half. Now, and we've known probably, for some time that the left side of our brain works the right side of the body and vice versa. So we knew that bit. But what we came to learn through the split brain experiments was that certain skills are lateralized to one side of the brain or the other. And so the left side appeared to be the brain that was very good at abstraction, very good at breaking things down into bits, almost like a digital bit-by-bit processor. And this brain's very, very good for processes like analysis. So it's our analytical side, if you like. And then the right side of the brain was different. It wasn't logical, it was more analogical. And it was more about big picture thinking. Now, a lot of that model has been proven to be slightly incorrect and not actually valid. There are lots of things that may predominate in the left side of the brain, but actually we're still using both sides of the brain in virtually everything that we do. Ian McGilchrist, in his book, The Master and His Emissary, gave us a new spin on this model, and that is that but this is based around looking at mammals primarily rather than human beings, and that is that in mammals, the left side of the brain seems to be specialized for focus, for focusing down on something specific. And the right side of the brain is our holistic, open brain that sees the bigger picture. So you can still see elements there of the left brain, right brain theory that I've been talking about. And so what Ian McGilchrist is saying is that there are two ways of thinking again. We can either be really focused deeply on a task, and that has consequences about the brain circuits that we use, or we can have a much more diffuse look on the world and on reality. And from an evolutionary point of view, we could ask, why do we have two sides to the brain? What is actually the purpose of that? That's quite an interesting thing to delve into. So that's the second model. Those two models came out in about the 1960s, so they've been around for some time. The third model I want to share, I'll call the active-passive model, and this model has come out of neuroscience imaging. And a guy called Marcus Rachel came up with this particular discovery. Most of the early imaging was done imaging people who were working on tasks, and we saw that the brain is very active and it's doing lots of things. Then they actually looked at, well, what's happening in the brain when you're not doing much at all? And what they discovered was it's just as active and sometimes more active. So and what they discovered as a consequence of that is that actually we have brain circuits that are only engaged when we're in the passive mode. And that when we focus, it's a switch. We switch off these additional circuits when we're in a focus mode. So isn't that interesting? We have some brain circuits, lots of them, that we're not accessing when we're active, task-focused. And just want to share with you one other model. It's not about the brain and how the brain works specifically, but it's about brain states. And this model goes back to sort of 1930 when we discovered brain waves and equipment for measuring brain waves. Because what came out of the brainwave research is that we have 4 prime brainwave states, and these can be seen on the measuring equipment. We have the alpha and beta waves, and interestingly, the alpha and beta are mainly active when we're focused, when we have focused tasks. Beta wave is particularly active when we're in Paul MacLean's Reptilian phase, and so these brainwaves seem to be to do with focus, outward focus. Then we have theta and delta waves, and these waves are lower energy waves and are there when we're inward, when we're focusing inwardly. So an example of us when we're in a theta wave state is when we're daydreaming. So actually, I hope that while I'm talking, you're primarily in alpha wave, which is an attentive outward wave, and that not too many of you are either in theta or delta, which means you're either daydreaming away or you're fast asleep. Okay, so I've shared those models, and they're all different models, but there does seem to be this underlying theme that the human brain has two ways of working, two ways of thinking, an active mode and a passive mode. So now the interesting thing is we've done a lot of research over years about how to have successful meetings, how to brainstorm, how to do things, to get ideas, to bring them forward. My perception is these are all very active things that we do. And when we're debating as to what we should do and what we shouldn't do, very active. And my question to you really is, do we have any place we can go where actually we activate together in a group our passive brain circuits? And I don't know that we do. So I think that the neurosurgeons, perhaps together with social scientists, really ought to be interested in this. They have opened the Pandora's box, that the human brain has these fantastic, passive, different circuits that are holistic, that seem to go all around the brain, and we simply, when we get down to make these sort of important sort of decisions, we're not using those circuits. Now, is there a process? Well, I don't know that there necessarily is, but I have to say that I come across one, and I just want to flag this up to you, because if you want to Google it, you can have a look and see, oh, that's interesting. Maybe we could start looking at this ourselves. And that is, there was a physicist, David Bohm, and he talks about what has now become called Bohmian dialogue. And Bohmian dialogue is where groups of people who are working on a problem basically sit in a room and appear to do nothing. Okay, now, that's why we need the research. That's why we need to spend a lot of money, actually, getting neuroscientists and the relatives to research this mode of thinking. Because do you think that the leaders would go for sitting around doing nothing most of the day in order to find a solution to poverty? So we don't know. I'm not saying we don't know what Bohmian dialogue will achieve, but we do need to research it. And because it is reaching different parts of our brain, maybe that's where, in those crevices of our mind, the solutions to these sorts of chronic problems are there, and they're hidden. Okay, so I can relax a little bit now, because I've made the main point, and the main point is that can we think differently? And my answer is perhaps. How would we think differently? We need to get together. We need to be able to get together in groups and quietly reflect inwardly. You see, the Bohmian dialogue works like this. People only speak when they have something to say or share. There are certain rules and principles. Everything that is said is valid, so you accept it. There's no attacking or defending. It's just another statement that is accepted and that goes into, if you like, the pot. And you only then speak, as the meeting progresses, you only speak if you've got something new to say that hasn't yet been said. And out of this process, what David Bohm claimed before his death was that actually some amazing ideas start to emerge. So this is completely different, for example, from brainstorming. Okay, so if we spend a lot of money, doing some research, getting the neuroscientists to work on this, that would be, in my view, fantastic. It would be interesting to see whether we get better quality decisions from groups of people sitting together like that compared to groups of people doing the traditional way of looking for solutions. Now, the other thing is, just the other day you may have read that in Britain they were thinking of rebuilding our parliament. And just a thought, it's going to cost a lot of money, but perhaps we don't want a new building with a great debating chamber in. We need a building with a dialogue chamber. and you wouldn't be able to hear a pin drop in there. So a completely different way of tackling problems and issues. For you yourselves, something practical for you as a takeaway is we all have our own chronic problems at home and at work. So instead of, or after you have worked away, focused on how are you going to sort out this particular problem, this particular issue, experiment. So just go for a shower. Just do something that helps you to relax. Take your mind off the specific topic and see what emerges. That would be finding the solution by engaging your passive part of the brain. And put it on a postcard and let me know how you get on if you do that. Okay, so I think, and thinking is what this was all about. I think I'm more or less there now. So go out and think differently.